Everybody, thanks so much for listening to us. If you're listening to us for the first time, please subscribe to this podcast. We do amazing interviews of amazing people. We're trying to get those out to as many people as possible. So again, please subscribe. Today we have David Edey. Again, it's davidedey.com. Definitely check him out. He's going to be talking about his book, The Executor, and we're going to talk about that and many other issues in between. I already told David we're going to have him on again because he's a wealth of knowledge in many different topics. So, David, thanks so much for coming on. Greatly appreciate it.
Rob, thanks for having me. I want to keep with that lineage you said of having amazing people on. And yes, I am amazing. So thank you for having me.
Okay. All right. So we'll move on to the interview. So, David, first of all, can you tell us what an executor is?
Well, an executor is the individual that the testator, someone who writes a will, leaves the job or the responsibility to look after the estate, to make sure that their final wishes are carried out. I should also preface it that being an executor is the worst job that you could have ever. And it's a job that's a thankless job because it's going to take anywhere from 18 to 24 months of your life and probably going to spend about 100 hours of your time to settle out the estate. So yes, it's a nice, final request of a friend or a relative, but it's also a job that you may come to rue the day that you said yes to it.
Okay. Because a lot of young people don't even know what any of these issues are. Unfortunately, they should, because a lot of these young viewers do have probably older parents. And with the coronavirus, we all don't know what's going to happen to us today, tomorrow, or weeks from now. So you should be looking into these issues. But David, can you tell us, how do you find the right executor for you when you're working on these issues?
Well, there's two issues there. When you did say about, younger people having to be put in this situation, I think because of the pandemic, it has probably, made them think about their own mortality more than they probably ever thought about it. And then you've also got the situation that they're probably going to be put in the situation where they're going to be responsible for their parents' end of life wishes. And look, what we're talking about here, we're talking about death, we're talking about wills and estate. It's not a sexy topic. Spoiler alert, we're all going to die. So we have to do some of this, what you, now I'm going to sound like an old man, what we call adulting. We're going to do a little adulting here by making sure that we understand that mom and dad, they're not always going to be there forever. And there are going to be steps that you're going to have to look after them. And one of them involves looking after their estate, which means you're also sometimes have to have those conversations with them, or hopefully they'll come and have the conversations with you.
I guess as a millennial myself, when is the right time for me to go up to my parents and say, hey, we have to have that conversation because I know the coronavirus is going on and we both, we have to watch our health and obviously our family's health in general, but it is a tough conversation. You don't want to go up to your parents and say, hey, I want to have a conversation about your will. And they may think like, are you trying to put me in the bag already? So,
You're absolutely right. It's a delicate conversation and that's why a lot of times it doesn't take place because people either avoid it, they procrastinate, oh, we'll get to it, or some families will have that conversation. So it depends on what's the family dynamics of how not only money, but tough conversations take place. Granted, you don't want to have this conversation over Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner. Mom, dad, what's going on with your will and your estate? By the way, can you pass the gravy? You don't want to have it at that point then. Maybe you want to say, hey, you know what? I was listening to a really great guy on a podcast and he was talking about being an executor. What have you done about your estate? Or as a young person, you should be thinking about it. You need to have your own will. Rob, do you have a will?
No.
Okay, so Rob, you do have. So why don't you have a will?
I have not looked into it. I thought I was young and and you're only supposed to have a will when you're older, but I'm wrong.
I'm not saying that you're wrong, and there's no
Oh,
judgment here. This is a free space. There's no judgment here. All I'm saying is you fall into the point of you're avoiding it, you're procrastinating because you're thinking, well, I don't have anything, and I think it's for when I'm older. Well, everybody's got an alarm clock. We just don't know when it's going to go off.
sure.
So, God forbid, if something was to happen to you, let's just say, I'm sure you've got a bank account or a car, you've got some savings or some money, and what's even more important, you've got some digital assets. You've got logins and passwords and stuff like that. If something was to happen to you, who would be able to look after those things to make sure that your social media shut down, all your passwords to your Netflix, your Amazon Prime account, all those things? Who would look after that? Or who would look after your, your savings and the investments that you have? How would that be taken care of if there's no will? What you've done is, by not having a will, you've left that up to the government to sort out how your estate would be, because you have passed away intestate, and you've left sort of a mess for your family to clean up. So as a young person, you need a will.
Wouldn't it be smart though, on your bank accounts, anything financial in general,
Right.
Your portfolio in general, I should say, you should have someone else on there that you trust.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, you would have someone to trust, but that's on your bank accounts. But then again, like I said before, is your digital assets. Maybe
Sure.
you've got cryptocurrency, got NFTs. All of those things all have digital passports too. And if something was to happen to you, what's going to happen to those assets? There's nobody that can log into them. You've got some investments. Maybe you don't want them to, be decided to or distributed by the government. You want to have someone that you trust to look after them, to be your executor. And that's the reason for my book, Executor Help, How to Settle an Estate, Pick an Executor and Avoid Family Fights, shameless plug. What I did there is I put together the book for people, whether young people like you, millennials, or also individuals who are older, to understand that they need to, if they're going to leave a legacy, is that they don't leave a legacy in a mess. So what you want to do is to make sure that you're organized. So someone like a millennial, intensive care is no place to find out that your mom or dad doesn't have a will. And if that's the case, you can't have a meaningful conversation with somebody when they're on a respirator. So you want to make sure that you've got all those things organized so that the family's not left in chaos or traumatized.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it is a tough situation in general. Again, for people that just started listening, this is David E. Edey. Again, davidedey.com. Definitely check out the book, The Executor. How do we make sure that that this money that's going to be divvied out between siblings is not destroying the family in general?
Well, that's how my book came about. It took me 7 years, 10 court appearances, and $50,000 settle my parents' estate, and they had a will. And that's because with 3 siblings, 2 of us, and it comes back to my parents. It came back to them not having a conversation and saying, this is what we want. We want everything to be split 3 ways, and there shouldn't be a fight. 2 of us, of the 3, 2 of us siblings understood that it should be split 3 ways, but there's one sibling who, like you're saying, they suffer from what they call the curse of inheritance. They believe that they're entitled to something else more than the other siblings, and hence we had to end up going to court. And I'm sure my parents had to have been spinning in their grave and horrified that here were their 3 moron knucklehead kids in court fighting over the estate, and there was no reason for it. But that responsibility and mistake falls on my parents because they didn't have that conversation to let everybody know what was in the will. A lot of parents are afraid to have that conversation because they say everybody's going to get along or somebody's going to get upset.
Yeah.
You know what? You need to have that conversation so that you say, this is what we're doing, and this is why we, for example, chose Rob as the executor, because he's more, he's I'm not going to say you're smarter than your siblings, but I'm going to say he's more organized and he's got a more focus. But if you feel to make things easier, we can make the three of you or the two of you as co-executors, but that means that everybody has to work together. What we're trying to stay away from is that the siblings don't disintegrate the family unit after a parent or both parents are gone. So it comes down to conversation. So the siblings are the reasons a lot of times that there's a lot of family discourse when it comes to an estate, because they suffer from a curse of inheritance.
So what is the triangle of conflict? How do we make sure that it doesn't happen?
Okay, so the triangle conflict, I came up with that, is that if you're an executor, there's one of three ways where you're gonna have a problem. If there's no will, there's gonna be a mess. If there's a second marriage, there's gonna be a mess. Or if the siblings and family members don't get along. If you've got at least one of those of the three, or if you got more than three, more than one of those three there from the triangle, you as an executor have your job just got a lot more difficult. It's going to be a lot harder to sell the estate because you've got a lot of nonsense that you've got to deal with, especially when it comes to siblings and family members that don't get along.
But is that like the stepsister, stepbrother, all that stuff?
Everybody who, because when it comes, you never really know about a sibling until you have to share an inheritance with them. So that's why as an executor, you have to have a strategy to figure out, how am I going to deal with these people? Because I'm telling you, people are going to lose their minds. People who you thought you knew when you're sitting at Christmas or Thanksgiving Day dinner, and then you're saying, oh, they're nice, but now there's cash on the table now. For some reason, they think this is a lottery or something that they've been entitled to, and they want their check, and they want it yesterday. They're not interested in what you as the executor has to do, or the job that you have to do, of the 100 hours that you have to put in. They're only interested in, scratch me my share. And you have to figure out a way to keep them in the loop, because it's not uncommon for siblings or beneficiaries to want to take you to court or want to have you removed.
Let's go to the last two questions. So, David, what do you hope people learn, but especially millennials, I would say, learn from this interview?
I think that you have to understand that talking about death doesn't mean that you're about to die, or if your parents talk about it, that they're going to die right away. I'll give my situation. Even though I've been a financial advisor for 35 years, when my parents were in my office having their will done, I'll tell you right up, I wasn't in the room when they were discussing it with the lawyer. My sister was there, my other sister was there, but not me. I couldn't fathom the thought of my parents dying. I just couldn't. I couldn't be in there. And I understand how difficult it is. But then again, even though I knew it was in the will, and even though they were having that talk, it would have been better if I was in there and they also had the conversation with all three kids and say, no, this is what we just did, and this is how we want things to go, and we don't want any fights. And that's the problem that they didn't do. So as a young person or a millennial, you're going to be in a situation where first you have to think about yourself. If something was to happen to you, you want to make sure that you're organized and you don't leave your parents or whoever you leave behind disorganized. And I also understand that your parents are getting older, and you need to make sure that they're going to be taken care of. And you want to make sure that their passwords and their digital assets are organized, but also what are their healthcare directives, and also what is their will going forward. And don't be afraid to have the conversation. And once you have that conversation and you get everything organized and the family knows what's going on, then you can move on to other things. But just don't be afraid. Far too often, families are left disorganized and in chaos because they haven't had the conversations. And you don't want to have that. And you don't want to have surprises, like I said, in the ICU unit, to find out that mom or dad don't have a will.
When should someone get a will? I know I told you I don't have a will right now, but if someone's listening to this, let's say they're 18, 20 years old, is that a good time for them to get a will once they get to college? Is that about the
Once you
right time?
once you start to have you have some assets, if you have a bank account, you've got a car, you've got digital assets, you got a social media. I'm not advocating that you have to go to a lawyer and spend a couple of $100. You could just do the basic online solution. There's a few of them out there that you can go online and set up your will, but make sure that your digital assets, your social media, all of those things are recorded and someone knows where they are, and all the other assets that you have. Start there. But then again, the adulting thing that you have to do is have that conversation with your parents, and don't be afraid. And even if they, I don't think they're gonna, I mean, unless they haven't done anything and they haven't had a conversation with you, I think they're going to be a little bit more comfortable you coming to them and say, you know what, I just want to make sure that everything is okay, that if something was to happen, what are we going to do? Again, when a death or something happens in the family, the trajectory and the direction of the family, how it's going to go, could go one of two ways. It could be a smooth thing because there's a lot of grief, and yes, there's a lot of heartache, or it could be a lot of grief, but then there's chaos and disorganization. So it's up to you how you would, want the situation to go. So my website is David Edey. So that's davidedey.com. And under my website, you're going to find, I've got excerpts from the book. I've got excerpts from the 50 questions, 50 answers to 50 executor questions that people have. I've got resources in terms of executor checklists, and there's tons of stuff on there. Or if you just want to, drop me a line and ask me a question, I'll be happy to answer.
And do you have any social media presence where people can find you?
Yep, you can find me on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on Twitter. All of that's all on my website, davidedey.com.
All right, davidedey.com.
edey.com.
David Edey, thanks so much for your time. I'm looking forward to our next conversation, and we will be booking it right now. So thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Rob. It's been a pleasure.